The global cost of the US and Israel's war of choice against Iran is already being felt in the oil and gas markets, and it could be about to get much worse. The energy minister of Qatar has told the FT this today. So he said, this will bring down the economies of the world. If this war continues for a few weeks, GDP growth around the world will be impacted. Everybody's energy price is going to go higher. There will be shortages of some products, and there will be a chain reaction of factories that cannot supply. Qatar is the world's second largest producer of liquid natural gas. It paused exports earlier this week after an Iranian strike against one of its plants. For the global oil market, it's what happens at the Strait of Hormuz that is proving most impactful. So the Strait of Hormuz is a sea passage connecting the Persian Gulf to the open sea. So it connects the oil fields of all the Gulf states, especially oil from Saudi Arabia and then gas from Qatar. 20% of the world's oil supply passes through it. This graphic from the Telegraph shows traffic in the strait on the 27th of February on the left there. And then on the right, you can see traffic from on March the 3rd. Sorry, so you can see it's pretty much completely come to a standstill. Oil tankers, which have attempted to cross the strait, have been targeted by Iran. You can see one there. And now, unsurprisingly, the insurance for any tanker who wants to make the crossing has become prohibitively expensive. Following comments from the Qatari energy minister, oil prices today hit almost $90 a barrel, up from $65 at the end of February. I'm now joined by David Waring, Assistant Professor in International Relations at the University of Sussex and an expert in the relations between Britain and the Gulf states. Welcome to the show, David. Great to have you back. Talk to me about the Strait of Hormuz. Lots of people over the last week will have been sort of reading about it, finding out about it. As someone, who's written a book about the relationship of Britain to those Gulf states, and, oil plays a big part in those stories. What should we know about the Strait of Hormuz?
I mean, it's the jugular vein of global capitalism. Think about it that way. As your graphic showed, 20% of oil that's shipped by sea goes through the Strait of Hormuz. And I think it's a similar percentage of liquefied natural gas. But it's not just those things. I mean, that's enough, right? I mean, that's a significant proportion of global energy supply. And that's energy not just for transport, but for industrial production. But it's not just those things. It's also all the derivatives that come from oil, synthetics, petrochemicals, plastics, fertilizers. Oil is really the lifeblood of the world economy still, unfortunately. And gas is a significant energy source as well. So, I mean, global capitalism doesn't function without this stuff for long. And if you have a big sort of disruption to this, a choke point like the Strait of Hormuz, in terms of oil, for example, that affects the global price of oil, which in turn, sooner or later, will affect the global price of everything. It will take a little while for it to work through the system, but sooner or later, it's going to affect everyone. Hence the comment from the Qatari energy minister, which I thought was really interesting, because that's the Qataris trying to raise the alarm. Basically, that's them saying this is a major emergency, and trying to put pressure on the Americans ultimately, but also trying to put pressure on other actors in the global system, including the Europeans, for example, trying to galvanise alarm so that pressure can then come on the Americans to stop this. And it's not alarmist, it's really serious. The global price of oil just before the war started, I think, was $72. And it has actually gone over $90 at the end of today. So that's just in a week. It's gone up by a significant percentage. If it gets to 150 and stays there, which it probably will, if this war continues, then we're talking a major global economic crisis, a really serious one, when we're only just recovering from the 2022 effects of the Russian invasion of Ukraine and what that did to global inflation.
And I mean, this in a way is the Iranian strategy working, right? This is what they've decided to do. They've said, Israel and America, if they're going to sort of go to war with us, we are going to raise the cost for the whole world, especially American allies in the region, but also everyone, with the hope that that will put pressure on the United States and Israel to hold off. Now, I don't think Israel are going to be particularly, amenable to arguments such as that. But Donald Trump, of course, he does care about inflation or the price of gas, as they call it, petrol going up, because that would affect his voter base for the midterm. So this is sort of, I suppose, Iran using a choke point effectively.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, it's you can see the logic, you can see the strategic logic of the whole response, right? The attacks on Gulf states, the attacks on shipping. I don't want to say it's legitimate. Attacks on civilian targets are always wrong in my view, but it's perfectly predictable. You can see why they would do it. And listen, I mean, I've been following this stuff 20, 25 years now, and I mean, in the mid-2000s. People were saying if you waged a war of aggression against Iran, if you tried to topple the regime, as the neoconservatives of the time wanted to do, it was widely sort of understood that this would be the sort of Iranian response. So when we heard Donald Trump say a day or two ago that one of the big surprises for him in the war was that the Iranians had carried out these attacks and tried to disrupt the Gulf economically, you have to wonder who's advising him, and you have to wonder why people like Keir Starmer and Merz and Macron weren't trying to raise the alarm with him as well. You could see this war coming from space, and you could see it was widely understood what the response from the Iranians would be. So this whole global economic crisis that's now barreling towards us at a rate of knots has been perfectly predictable, easy to predict, and you have to wonder why more people weren't saying to Donald Trump before it happened, not least Keir Starmer, you can't do this, and this is why it would be so disastrous. But apparently no one wants to stand up to this guy, or very few people do.
Because it will impact Europe and Asia more than the Americans, because they are now they're an oil exporter. So because oil is a global market, it will make oil more expensive for consumers, but some of their big companies will profit from this because the oil price has gone up and they're an exporter. I think with gas, the Europeans will be much more affected than the Americans, because we're more reliant on liquid natural gas than America is, because, again, they produce so much of this stuff.
This is all true, but remember that these effects work through in stages. So it depends how long this war goes on. If it goes on for several weeks into a couple of months, you'd have already felt the direct effects, and then the second order and third order effects will come. Look, global capitalism is interconnected. So people like the Americans who might think they're insulated will find soon enough that the ripple effects will hit them. So, maybe they're overconfident now, but they shouldn't be.
And how pissed off are the Gulf states going to be with this? Because, I mean, there's kind of a deal, isn't there, with the Gulf states and especially the Americans, which is the Americans get to keep their military bases on their territory. I suppose until America became the net exporter of oil, America would buy their oil. And in return, America was supposed to guarantee their security. But now the Americans have started a war which they're bearing the brunt of. There aren't bombs falling in the United States of America. The bombs are falling in Qatar or Bahrain. So for them, is this a betrayal?
Yeah, to a degree. I mean, I've been reading some of the reporting over the last few days. You're not going to get, I suppose, sort of outright forcible statements against Trump and against Netanyahu in the same way as you've had from, say, Pedro Sanchez, the Spanish Prime Minister. But from what I'm reading in the reporting, you're getting lots of a sense that Gulf officials are briefing aggressively to journalists that they don't like this. And you can well understand why. I mean, the way you put it, the deal was that the Americans, provide a security umbrella to these Gulf states. The security umbrella is external and internal. And one of the reasons the Gulf states have been doing all this quote-unquote modernisation, which is a problematic term, but we'll leave that to one side. The reason they've been trying to change their economies, diversify their economies, is to help the regime stay in power, keep the public happy. diversify the economy, liberalise socially, if not politically, to keep the people happy and help the regime stay in power. Now, this is doing enormous damage to the Gulf's viability in terms of the economic model they've been trying to develop over the last 10, 15 years, becoming global hubs, becoming more interconnected, attracting tourism, stuff like that. The Americans have undermined that. The Americans have undermined the Gulf monarchs' economic survival strategy just as much as they've undermined their external security by starting this war. You know, you could argue pretty convincingly that, yeah, of course, it's the Iranians who are attacking the Gulf states, but the Iranians are attacking them as a predictable consequence of this American and Israeli act of aggression. So it doesn't... the Gulf states would be quite justified in thinking this is our protector, the Americans, is potentially our biggest security threat at the moment. And yeah, you can sense the frustration. The quote you put up there from the Qatari energy minister is a sign of that. But there's a lot more of that sort of thing in the reporting from anonymous officials saying how concerned they are.
And your book from 2018, Anglo-Arabia and Why Gulf Wealth Matters to Britain, I mean, it was specifically on the relationship between Britain and the Gulf states. So I want to discuss that and bring up a map as well, actually, because I keep hearing from sort of UK government officials sort of the reason that this, that we're now involved in this war, even though we didn't start it, is because we've got all of these interests in the region. You can see we've got a base in Cyprus with 4,000 personnel, and then much smaller bases, Oman, the UAE, Qatar, and then Bahrain, 300 personnel in Bahrain. Now, from my understanding, sort of a UK base in these regions is a bit like a little area cordoned off on an American base, because it's the American that's a real military power, and we just sort of have a little zone for ourselves. Why do we have these military bases in the Middle East? Why do we need all of these?
Yeah, it's not a sense of we needing the bases. I mean, David and Michael and everyone watching at home don't need military bases in the Gulf. This is a hangover from the British sort of imperial period in the Gulf, going up to the 70s when the Gulf states got their independence. The British have been trying to cling on to that imperial role, just as the British state has been trying to cling on to its power and influence in the world system. And when we talk about defence, in quotes, it's difficult sometimes to disaggregate what is legitimate defence. Like defending British citizens in the Gulf, that's legitimate. Defending the British homeland, defending British legitimate interests, that's all fine. And what's actually just about the British state wanting to project and maintain power in the world system for its own interests, and in terms of like the interests of the concentrations of capital and class interests that align with the British state. And for me, having like major military bases in the Gulf is more about the latter than the former. Yeah.
And I mean, does having those bases mean that we do inevitably get brought into a war when this kind of thing happens? I mean, if there is there has been some kind of drone attack on Cyprus, hasn't there been? If Britain has personnel there and they get killed, are we suddenly at war with Iran?
I mean, this is the danger when you're there and you can potentially be treated as a target. And then kind of credibility almost demands that you have a response, political credibility at home, because obviously Starmer has been getting a lot of stick from the right over this attack on Cyprus and the British supposedly not being ready to repel that or to respond to it. So the more you're present in a region like that, in a volatile region like that, and your quote unquote interests are attacked, then the more exposed you are to being dragged into a conflict, whether or not that's what you wanted. It's one of many reasons why we need to really rethink British foreign relations, rethink British. What do we mean by defence? Are we trying to defend Britain as a country? Are we trying to defend our allies in Europe? Or are we trying to project power on an intercontinental basis, which is a hangover of empire and a function of our kind of collaboration of American imperialism?